Hey guys, welcome to the Silver Report Uncut. I thank you so much for helping me out. It's very touching, and people were saying everything keeps going wrong. Maybe you should, reevaluate the path you're on, and you should always do that. But sometimes things just don't go the way you plan. Sometimes every door just shuts all at once, and when those things happen, as I said, it's time to examine your life, of course, but it's not always within your control. You can plan how things are going to go, and I, for one, I plan everything to a ridiculous extent. When we go out places as a family, normally my pockets are filled, my bags are filled, I got every single thing that might possibly happen, I'm prepared to meet it. I was a Boy Scout when I was younger, always be prepared. So I always try to plan out ahead, what kind of events we're going to face, what kind of crisis we're going to face, if we have any problems here, what happens if this begins to be a problem, et cetera, et cetera. I go down the line, I try to make sure that I never make a mistake. Unfortunately, things just don't always go according to my plan, and this is actually unique. Typically, I would say everything opens up to me, kind of like everything I try to do and I put my hand to do typically works out. And that's not normal for most people. Believe it's some providence and a little bit of grace. But suddenly, this didn't work out. And the way it didn't work out is interesting because sometimes we want things so badly. Maybe we want the wrong thing. Maybe we know nothing at all about our current situation or our future situation. And maybe we don't actually examine our own actions good enough against the light of right and wrong. So I wanted to talk about the way things are going right now with the inflation. The expectations for the University of Michigan's inflation, it rose again in September. The hope that was actually rising had begun to fall once again after the ECI and the Core PCE indicated that the Fed's inflation is not going away. When you look at the survey, the final data for October, it's the last chance to demonstrate that inflation expectations are being handled before the next week's FOMC meeting. The final print for next year's inflation forecast was somewhat lower than the flash print, 5% versus 5.1%, but it still remained higher than the September final print of 4.7%, and it's really bad that it's rising at all. The headline UMich sentiment measures increased little to 59.9% in October, driven by the improvement in present conditions, although the future expectations fell. And in the month, the university's sentiment index rose to 59.9, the highest level since April. In October, the current circumstances index rose to a 6-month high, while a measure of expectations fell to a 3-month low. Purchasing circumstances for durable goods such as automobiles, appliances, they improved due to the easing supply chain constraints and lower prices. Consumers were more pessimistic about the business outlook. Quote, "These divergent patterns reflect substantial uncertainty over inflation, policy responses, and global developments. And consumer views are consistent with an impending recession in the economy." That was Joanne Su, survey director. Now, this misery is projected to continue, as over 80% of consumers expect interest rates to rise in the coming months for 8 months in a row. The ECB raised interest rates by 75 basis points, as predicted, along with the fee hike. In some other concerning news, for the third consecutive quarter, La Niña has returned. It's resulted in a drier-than-average condition over the crop belt of America, and according to some farmers who spoke, the weather was so dry that plants are fighting to emerge from the ground and fertilizer is draining from the soil. The likelihood that this winter's growing season in the Midwest will be unfavorable is increasing. According to the most recent official data, the drought in the western part of the U.S. is becoming worse. And regarding the winter wheat, there's a drought in about 75% of croplands, which is the largest percentage in decades. In order to replenish the soil with nutrients before the spring growing season, farmers typically spread chemical fertilizer over their fields in the winter. According to Gary Miller-Shecky, some farmers are rethinking this practice out of a concern that it will simply evaporate and disappear. In the state's southwest, Miller-Shecky, he also raises corn and wheat. Due to the extreme drought, he claimed to have planted roughly 4,000 acres of winter wheat, but only anticipated harvesting 1,500 of those acres, or less than half. When it's this dry, you can't tell if something's going to sprout, perish, or come up the following year. And because of these dry conditions, some plants would not even emerge until next spring, putting the yields at jeopardy. In the U.S. Drought Monitor, the drought-affected grain production areas, they were increasing. And we see the wheat in spring was at 75% of the areas were in drought. Wheat in winter, 74%, an increase of 4%. 71% of soybeans, which is an increase of 10%. For the corn areas, it's 70%. That's up 8%. So it's looking like there's going to be even more strain naturally on the food supply. If only there weren't these nefarious actors out there trying to sabotage our food supply, what might not be so bad. We'd probably have plenty of reserves. but it's looking quite dire, seeing how these madmen are in control of our very lives. This is regarding the supply chains. China continuously is shutting down a lot of the manufacturing, a lot of the very critical things that the world needs. And they were looking at these employees in Foxconn. They're essentially locked in there, and typically they are. That's the place they surround with the nets, so that if you do want to escape your horrible life through, just jumping off the building or something like that, they're going to stop you. They're going to force you to continue to work. You're never going to be able to stop. This is the working party. That's the party they're having in there. That's what they mean when they say the workers' party. They're not allowed to stop this party, apparently, and they're supposed to do it 80 hours a week. The employees in groups of up to a dozen, they said they're sharing cramped living quarters, according to this article that came out. Contradictory accounts suggest that the isolated employees may have been denied sufficient food, and we see Foxconn, they were instituting health restrictions. And overall, this is the company that makes the Apple products. I hope you're aware. It's a major, major factory. They live there, most of the people. They have 2 pairs of clothing. They're both uniforms. While they're wearing one, they wash the other by hand and they hang it on their prison cell bars that hang out on the side of the windows. So their Zhengzhou campus, it employs 300,000 people, all of whom they're prohibited from dining in public, and they must carry their meals back to their dormitories or their prison cells for consumption. According to the South China Morning Post, Foxconn staff in Zhengzhou are only authorized to travel along specified routes inside the site, with several entrances barred in a de facto shutdown, the SCMP said. Another notification instructed personnel living off campus to relocate to on-campus dorms. So all of you that are working off the farm, you now need to move on and become isolated with the rest of our captives. According to a representative for Foxconn, manufacturing of iPhones at the Zhengzhou facility continues regular for the time being, despite the recently imposed limits. Well, I'm sure it continues regular. The people aren't allowed to do anything but work. Production at the Zhengzhou campus is regular, and no discernible effect from the incident is being noted, according to a spokesperson. China's yet to abandon their long-standing zero-sickness policy. More than 1 million individuals in the metro region around the iPhone campus were instructed to remain at home earlier this month. Now, this is insane. You can't have a city that large and these manufacturing facilities that large that if one person gets sick, you just shut the whole thing down. I don't understand why they're not catching on with what the rest of the world is doing. I do know what's going on there. I do know what's going on, but this crazy thing is that they're damaging their own economy. They're damaging their own chances of surviving this throughout a recession, and simply using more and more stimulus measures is not enough to be able to replace what they're losing. I mean, 300,000 people that worked there. Some of them did not live in the prison cell complex. They're forcing them all on there, and they've made this giant farm full of people, 300,000 people that are not allowed to leave, not allowed to do anything but make iPhones. How come they can make iPhones but they can't leave? And if the whole region's shut down, why is the factory individually shut down? Because the whole region's shut down. Where are they going to go? It doesn't make any sense. It never has. It never will. It's very, very concerning the way they're moving forward, because earlier they were also shutting down other manufacturers. They were shutting down the shipping corridors. Everything they can, it seems, to be able to slow down the world economy. I still remember all of this when it began, when they were saying that, and it was the World Bank, the UN, they were explaining that if China were to drop down to a mere 4% growth rate, that the entire world would plunge into a recession. Now they're below that now, and they're manipulating all their data so that people don't realize it. They have just destroyed their economy, and they continue to destroy their economy and their people. This is going to be a problem for the rest of the world. I thank you guys for stopping by and joining us. As always, stay free.